everyone. Our keynote speaker, Mr. M. Damodaran, Chairperson Excellent Enablers Private Limited and former Chairman, SEBI, UTI and IDBI, distinguished speaker at panel discussion, past President, member of Bombay Chamber Board and distinguished guest. A very warm welcome to each one of you for joining us today for the conclave on enhancing governance assurance. On the behalf of Chamber and all the participants, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Mr. M. Damodaran and our distinguished speakers for accepting our invitation and gracing this event to address us on an important topic today. Our special thanks to Ernst Young, Khaitan Co, Aditya Birla Capital Limited, Castrol Industries, Colgate and Tata Chemicals for exceeding their support for this event. We look forward to their support in our future endeavors. Now I would like to invite Ms. Pinky Mehta, President-Designate, Bombay Chamber and Chief Financial Officer, Aditya Birla Capital, to deliver opening remarks and set the theme for the conclave.
Distinguished keynote speaker, Mr. M. Damodaran, Chairperson of Excellence Enablers Private Limited and former Chairman of SEBI, UTI and IDBI. Esteemed speakers, members of Bombay Chambers Board and honored guests. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you all in this conclave on enhancing the governance assurance organized by Bombay Chambers and Commerce and Industry, the oldest chamber of commerce in India. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speakers for accepting our invitations to share their insight on this crucial subject. Over the years, we have remained committed to fostering the culture of technology, innovations, acting as a liaison between the business community and the regulator bodies to improve the ease of doing business. We have also focused on enhancing through the sound financial structures, ensuring that the growth is sustainable, equitable, and inclusive. As a chamber, we consistently bring together the leaders from India Inc. and collaborate with the government and regulatory authorities. Our mission encompasses the four pivotal aspects. First is embracing digitization, bringing sustainability to the heart of the business, fostering diversity, equity, and inclusions, and enhancing the ease of doing business. Aligned with this mission, we have organized numerous seminars, webinars, conclaves, and conferences across various sectors, including BFSI, sustainability, agriculture, diversity and inclusion, taxations, and legal service. Recent events include the private equity and the venture capital conclave on SM REITs and the thought leadership series with the industry leaders. Today, we have a full day of knowledge sharing with our governance and insurance conclave and the DEI awards this evening. All these events features the distinguished speakers, who will share their expertise with the engaged audience. Our panel discussions for today covers the highly topical theme of enhancing governance assurance. Effective assurance integrates an appropriate governance framework and risk-aware culture within the organizations. I think we all agree this is non-negotiables. Governance and compliance for all the companies needs to be of the highest order. It involves a thorough understanding of strategic goals and associated risk, robust internal controls and verification of these controls that they are functioning properly or not. Assurance is not merely about just ticking the box or following the procedures. It ensures that the assurance framework is relevant and effective in practice. Our speakers, eminent experts in the field, will debate the topic through. We have two panel discussions today. First panel discussion is on strengthening the governance through our audit committee, and the second panel discussion is the role of the internal audit in the assurance-based governance. Now I know you are looking forward to hearing from our expert speakers, so I'll hand over our comparator, Anaya, to guide us through the rest of the event. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I would like to invite Mr. M. Damodaran, Chairperson Excellence Enablers Private Limited and former Chairman SEBI, UTI and IDBI to deliver keynote address. Before that, I will take few minutes to introduce him. Mr. Damodaran has in career spanning over 52 years worked with the union and state government in India, regulatory bodies, investment institutions, banks, development financial institutions with the private sector. He has held regulatory and developmental positions in the Government of India's financial sector before becoming officer as the Chairman SEBI, February 18, 2008. After career spanning several regulatory and development assignments in the state of Tripura, he was appointed as a Chief Secretary in 1992, Joint Secretary in Ministry of Finance, Banking Division for the 5 years, and thereafter as officer on a special duty with RBI. In 2001, he has appointed as the Chairman of UTI. His restoring of UTI to health and strength is widely acknowledged as the most successful turnaround story in the India's financial sector. He was simultaneously given the charge of IDBI, which was restructured by him with an innovative manner. As a Chairman SEBI, he brought improved practice to India's security markets. He is widely acknowledged as one of the India's foremost champion of the corporate governance. During his tenure at SEBI, he was elected Chairman of the International Organization of Security Commission's 80 members Emerging Markets Committee for 2 years. He is presently an independent director of the Board of Larsen & Toubro and Bicon. He is a nominee director of the Board of Interglobal Aviation, Bajaj Allianz General Insurance Company, and Bajaj Allianz Life Insurance Company. He is the founder of Excellence Enablers, a specialist corporate governance initiative that focuses on improvement of board performance and addresses coaching and mentoring needs of corporate India. As one of the foremost advocates of the corporate governance in India, he advises on improving board performances. He has been recipient of several prestigious awards for leadership, transformation, and public service. Without taking further time, I would like to invite Mr. Damodaran to the dais for his keynote address.
Good morning, friends. It's an extraordinary pleasure to be here at an event organized by India's oldest Chamber of Commerce, as we have been informed, not just today, but over the years. A chamber with a distinguished record of leadership in doing the right things and in encouraging its member associations and the rest of the world, members and the rest of the world, to practice what is right, to do what is right, to propagate what is right, and to spread the message of good governance. I believe that all of you in this room are persons who practice good corporate governance, and the challenge that I have, the challenge that most persons speaking at such events have, is that you're attempting to preach to the converted. Those that need to get the message are not here in this room, they're outside. And therefore there is a huge challenge, which is how do you take this message outside, your message and mine, to tell them that there is merit in doing the right thing. At Excellence Enablers, we have a simple definition for corporate governance. Doing the right things at the right time, in the right manner, and for the right reasons. That's all. It's not complicated. It's as simple as that. There are 4 dimensions to it. And if one does that, one is invariably right in matching your effort and your expectations. Let me start with a different approach. The problem is that ever since Adrian Cadbury released his report, corporate governance has been number 1 in the list of topics discussed the world over. If there is nothing to discuss, you discuss corporate governance. So it is both a gap filler as well as the principal actor in several events of this kind. What has happened over the years is that we've complicated corporate governance. We have made it difficult for people to understand what is this animal called corporate governance, and regulators have helped in the cause of complicating matters. I was hoping Anant would be here, but he's not here today. And courtesy the lawmakers and regulators, we are in a situation in which people that want to do good because they believe that's the right thing to do face a lot of procedural difficulties and some substantive difficulties. People that don't want to do good will do what they want to do no matter what the regulations say, no matter what the laws say. And I might lose friends when I say this, but aided by specialist accountants, lawyers and consultants, they do find how to get around the prescription of law and regulations. What happened in the US in 2008, or even before that, when Enron blew up and also helped blow up Arthur Andersen, what happened? They found that there were several processes that were missing, which needed to be refined. And this was caused by people who should have actually helped companies do the right thing. The accounting profession that did much of the damage to honest reporting then became the solution providers. So first you're a part of the problem, then you become a part of the solution. Of course, not new. Adrian Cadbury also said that it was the expert accounting practices that led to the problems of companies not reporting the right things. That is where it all started. Right. So I want to start with a different kind of an approach. Today we are looking at enhancing governance assurance. So lawyers will tell you that sitting in that topic is what is called a rebuttable presumption. That there is already governance assurance and you're attempting to enhance it. What if I tell you that we should question that basic proposition, that what passes for governance assurance today is ticking a few boxes, is telling those that want to be informed that you're doing the right things, even though both sides are convinced they're not doing the right things. And then the regulator comes like a ton of bricks and tells you that you have not done what was expected to be done. So let's start by questioning the basic assumption itself. Does governance exist? Governance is not compliance. Compliance is a non-negotiable requirement. If you're a listed entity, you'd better comply. You cannot say that I will pick and choose. In fact, when Clause 49 was introduced, there were some people who said, it's difficult to comply with Clause 49, and even as they told you this, you realize that there are several other clauses of the listing agreement that they were non-compliant with. Clause 49 was only one of the additions to the list of non-compliances. And this is for public sector as well as the private sector. The nature of ownership did not distinguish the level of compliance. Both were equally blameworthy in that particular environment. So we must first understand that governance is much, much more than compliance. Compliance is only one of the ingredients of governance. Because if someone tells you this is what you need to do and you do it, you're not doing because you believe in it, but because you need to exist in that ecosystem, therefore you're doing it. When you move from that situation to doing the right things because you believe that is the right thing to do, that is when you practice governance. And I think among the 5,000 or 6,000 companies that are listed and the 100,000 plus of unlisted entities, it'd be very easy to identify those, if one looks for it, to see who is practicing governance, not those who are practicing compliance. All listed entities are expected to practice. Otherwise, they could have their listing suspended. So if that is what governance is, I think it is time for every person involved in the process of promoting governance, whether you're accountants, whether you're lawyers, you're promoters, you're directors, independent, non-independent, nominee, whatever the appellation that is given to you, every person has a rule to do what he or she needs to do to promote governance. And that's not happening. Why is it not happening? Because everyone believes that my remit is limited to this particular aspect, and I don't have to look at the totality of the issues that impact on governance in corporates. What we need to do now, looking forward, I don't have a crystal ball, I am not an astrologer, I don't know what the future of governance will be in this country. But I can say this, that if the future is to be meaningful, if it's to be pragmatic, if it is to promote the ease of doing business, we need to completely reinvent our thinking on governance. We need to move away from a prescriptive arrangement where every morning you write out a new regulation, where you amend laws because you don't have much else to do. We need to move away from that. Post 2008, I think lawmakers and regulators have got hyperactive in prescribing. Prescribing is not the end in itself, it's a means to an end. And if that means itself is counterproductive, you have a problem. When is the last time any regulator, especially in the financial sector, did something called a regulatory impact assessment to see where that regulation is hitting, in what manner, who is paying the price for it? Sometimes you write extraordinarily difficult regulations and you think you're helping the cause of the man on the street, the retail investor, the small investor. It is he or she who picks up the tab at the end of the day for all the regulations that you write. The rest are pass-through agents. No promoter picks up the tab for regulation. Companies pick up the tab, and when companies pay the money for it, that impacts on the shareholders' money. That is from where the money comes really to pay. And it is in his or her name that you keep writing regulations like there is no tomorrow without figuring out what the impact of those regulations are. There has been talk about regulatory impact assessment for years. Nobody's done anything about it. And if the future is going to look better than what it looks today, one of the things that regulators need to do is to look at regulatory impact assessment. The second is to take away from the rule books all the rules which are past the sell-by date. There must have been a context in which a regulation was written. The world has moved on since then. But the regulation remains. Why? Because nobody looked at it. What is worse, some hyperactive functionary in a regulatory organization could tell you that you are running foul of the law by referring to a regulation which should no longer have been on the rule books. Let me give you an example from outside the securities environment. Many years ago, and it was on the statute book for years, there was a rule on which side of the road you can walk your dog. On which pavement you can walk your dog, there was a rule on that. It remained on the books for more than 50 or 60 years till before it was taken away. During that process, what happened? Roads disappeared, pavements disappeared, but dogs need to walk. You need to take them somewhere. And every time you took your dog out for a walk, you were violating the law. Because it said you needed to take it on the right side of the pavement. The right side pavement had been taken up by shopkeepers and whoever, and there was no pavement left for the dog. Do you have that kind of regulations even today on your books? Why? Because nobody has taken it out. You need to have, and I compliment the Reserve Bank of India for it, the Regulatory Review Authority, which is looking at all the junk that is there in the regulations and weeding it out. It's a very, very welcome initiative. This is the second time that they're doing it. The first time was done when Dr. Reddy was the Deputy Governor of the RBI. Everybody needs to do that. Most other regulators and lawmakers did a reasonable job. They took out a lot of books. For example, there was a law which said that if you are the owner of a place which has been described not as a hotel, but as an eating place. You had to have a source of water where I could come on horseback and take my horse to drink water, right? There was an incident in Delhi where in a 5-star hotel, a sub-inspector of police went, partook of some of the goodies that were on offer, refused to pay the bill when it came to him, and when he was told there are no exemptions for police officers here, he said, okay, I will show you the strength of the police. Went, got hold of a horse from somewhere, brought it and said, show me where this horse can drink water. And this was on the statute books for more than 100 years. Of course, the manager was smart. He took him to the swimming pool and said, drink as much as you want. We're not stopping you, right? But everybody's not that intelligent. So why can't we look at regulations? I believe you need a regulation review authority, you need a regulation preview authority. Before you write regulations, see what public purpose it's going to serve. And you provide in regulations sunset clauses so that you are obliged to revisit those regulations around the time of sunset to see whether there is continuing relevance. We don't do these things. The other thing is you must write regulations in simple sentences. The problem with regulations being written in complex sentences is that only lawyers understand it, and therefore if you want to comply with the law, you've got to engage a lawyer and cough up fees. Right? In fact, when the Constitution of India was written, an eminent constitutional expert from the United Kingdom said that this is a good play field for lawyers, and I'm sure Mr. Bharatvasani can recall this. He said this is a very good play field for lawyers, and if you see the kind of cases filed today, so many years after the Constitution came into being, we're still interpreting the Constitution. Why? Because we didn't write it in simple sentences. We wrote it in complex sentences. And now you have so many opportunities to correct it. I urge those of you who have the time to look at the definition of fraud in the Companies Act. The way it is drafted is actually fraudulent. Firstly, you have not defined the offense, but you prescribe the punishment for fraud. And where does the definition come? After you prescribe the punishment, at the end of it, it says that for the purpose of this section, fraud means. So you don't know what the offense is, but you've already prescribed how to deal with the offense. Then you look at how that sentence flows. If you want to actually check your lung capacity, you should read that sentence in one go without stopping. If you can read it in one go without stopping, of course you won't get the meaning if you do that, but you will at least tell yourself, my lung capacity is good because I can read that. I recommend to people that don't have more than 13 words in a sentence. Once upon a time, when the British Broadcasting Corporation was held up as a model, they had a book for newscasters which said that no sentence should have more than 13 words. Why? Because your breath quality will drop and you will not be clear to those that are listening to you. Right? We need to have that kind of a rule which says that if you don't have more than so many words, it will pass the test of being comprehensible to those who are actually reading it. I've said this at lawyers' conferences that you are telling me that ignorance of law is no excuse, but help me understand the law by stating it simply. Why do I need to go to a lawyer every time I have to find out what the law says? That is one thing we need to do. Write only relevant regulations, take out all the junk, and write it in a simple manner. If that doesn't happen, your problem will continue. People will make mistakes. They'll fall foul of the regulations, not because they want to do it, but because that's not their day job. Reading and understanding regulation, they got a business to run. And all of this, including governance, is not the end in itself. These are all means to an end. The end is doing business, being facilitated to do business. And when we talk about ease of doing business, the same circulars and guidelines which set out in great detail and complexity all manner of stuff, they say is to promote the ease of doing business. Ask the guy that's doing business, that's the real test, whether this is actually promoting the ease of business. I was once asked when the GST was introduced, a student asked me, I was talking to some students, and during Q&A time he asked me, so is this a good tax, GST? Fairly early days. I said it's described as a good and simple tax. That is what GST is. The government says it's good. As for whether it's simple, if your father or mother is running a business, ask them. They will tell you whether it's simple. That is what GST is about. Continues to be interpreted and has become a weapon of, extraction of how do you get things out of people that are not obliging you with goodies. It's a bad situation. It's a challenging situation. Don't make light of it. I'm not saying this because Bharat said you need to say something provocative. No. He told me as I was coming here, don't tell us the usual stuff. Say something provocative. And he also said, say something that is not politically correct. I said, I don't know what is correct. Then comes a question of what is politically correct. So I'm not saying this because you should take this lightly. I think all of you who are important members of the ecosystem, in your own way, should re-examine what is the legal and regulatory prescriptive arrangement in which businesses are operating, and chip away or at least put enough pressure for regulators to chip away at the regulations that don't need to exist any longer. Today's newspaper says that the insolvency and bankruptcy regulator has reduced the number of things that the resolution professionals need, the information to be given. Now, today, if you have said that in the morning or you said it yesterday, the papers picked it up today, clearly you didn't need that information all this while. The problem is we confuse data with information. Only actionable data is information. So even directors are at the receiving end of this. Managements that want to confuse them, confound them, throw a whole lot of stuff at them. Much of it doesn't make sense, doesn't need to make sense. And from there you got to extract what is relevant to determine what the issue is. We need to get away from all of this. I think we have a duty to ourselves and to the system in which we operate, of which we are very important elements, to simplify matters. Looking ahead, I believe that our major challenge should be simplify the system in which we operate. If that doesn't happen, and if laws and regulations just keep multiplying, if there is not an exponential growth but an explosive growth of prescriptive arrangements, then people will shut shop literally and say, why do I need to do business? If I have to do all of this, maybe it's much easier to sit back and hope that somebody will feed me. People are doing business for a reason. They're contributing to the economy. On the one hand, you want everybody to contribute to the economy, to contribute the process of nation building. And at the same time, these self-perpetuating arrangements of regulatory organizations have put us in a place from where we cannot easily exit also. Even exit is difficult. Existing is difficult, exit is also difficult. So how do you then cope with that? Auditors, yes, have to play a role, have to be sincere to the profession, serious enough, demonstrate both competence and independence, as also accept accountability. Lawyers clearly need to interpret the law as it was meant to be interpreted, not as the clients would want you to interpret it. I've been to a lawyer once, many years ago, when I was a relatively young man. I'm still young. But I went many years ago to a lawyer when I was in the government and said, we need your views on this. Very senior man. And he said, you want me to support your proposal or oppose it? I have judgments on both sides. Which do you want? So I said, tell me what is right. He said, there's nothing called right. Tell me what you want, and I'll give you an expert opinion supporting that. Do we want that kind of a system, not just to continue, but to proliferate? That's the challenge which we are facing today. younger people who are coming in need to challenge the systems more. If younger persons say, sorry, I am not willing to live with this. What happened after 2008 in the United States? What happened after Sarbanes-Oxley came in? A lot of companies said, we don't want any part of this, we will delist and we will operate as an unlisted entity. Why? Because you thought it was very onerous and it has a cost to comply with all those increasing regulations. So let us decide, each of us, no matter what our profession is, that if we are a part of this ecosystem, there is a responsibility cast on us to help make it simpler, because the objective, the end, is promoting the ease of doing business. If we are going to do things that don't work towards that end, and we are getting caught in the means and confusing the means with the ends, we are not going to make progress. And that is a challenge that I think collectively, as well as individually, all of us need to address. The last point I wanted to make is this. We have a lot of companies that do not have the ability. I'm not talking about willingness. They're all willing to be good corporate citizens, but don't have the ability to comply with the plethora of prescriptive arrangements. Let's help to take them out of the system and exist outside of that. Even exiting from that, as I mentioned, is difficult. And then they continue to stay there. And what happens? You have to be in business. You have a company. The company happens to be listed. You're finding it difficult to get it delisted. And therefore, you are obliged to resort to shortcuts. And when you resort to shortcuts, then regulators come after you. And then you file for settlement. And when you file for settlement, who pays that amount? The company pays that amount. It doesn't come from the pockets of the promoters. And when the company pays that amount, effectively the shareholders are paying that. So firstly, you commit fraud on the shareholders. And then when you're caught, you say, I don't want to plead guilty. I'm not pleading not guilty. So I'm going for settlement proceedings. And then some large sum you're asked to settle with. And the company ends up picking the bill, which means the shareholders are picking up the bill, not the promoters, not the KMPs. Let's say. We must have lesser cases that are taken up. And I've always believed in this. Don't have thousands and 10,000 cases. Take much fewer cases, deal with them quickly, deal with them effectively, let the punishment be deterrent if the guilt is proved. Make an example of them. Don't stretch regulatory capacity by taking on all sundry cases and then passing all kinds of orders after 10 years or so, and then your appellate authorities come down heavily on you. Then your regulatory organization's credibility gets impacted. All of us need to keep these things in mind. These are the smaller things that are important. I look forward to the deliberations today. I think we are going to see a lot of points being made. I hope they will challenge status quo. I hope they will challenge what exists today. I hope Bharat will lead the way to make the provocative statements that he wanted me to make, so that we end up at the first step of trying to take away what is irrelevant, what is inconsequential, and then focus on the essentials. I will close with one observation. There are ladies in the audience, so don't get me wrong. This is not my original contribution. This was what I heard in this city from a stand-up comedian when I was in the audience listening to him carefully, wondering at that point of time whether I had a post-retirement career option as a stand-up comedian. I discovered I did not have that, but therefore I followed him very closely. And he said when he was in school, and don't get me wrong, as I said, and I'll repeat, not my contribution, I am a strong votary of the women being the stronger people in our lives, in our families, and in boardrooms too. But this is what he said. He said when he was in school, he was taught simple sentence, compound sentence and complex sentence. Some of you might have heard this. This is a Bombay-based comedian, a guy who scored 100 runs on a day when Sachin Tendulkar scored 250. And when he went back home, he told his mother, I scored 100. He said, Sachin scored 250. So that put an end to his cricket. He's written a book called How Sachin Tendulkar Killed My Career. And then he thought comedy was a better option. There were no such risks, no scoreboards, right? So he thought it's a waste of time learning simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences. Then after he went into college and was lucky enough to get a girlfriend, he discovered the true import of these three kinds of sentences. A simple sentence, he said, was when the lady in your life said, I'm going shopping. Simple sentence, no danger, all safe. Compound sentence, I am going shopping and you are coming with me. Now the problem started. Complex sentence, I am going shopping and you are coming with me provided you're carrying a wallet and there's enough money in it. Complex sentence. That is why you need to avoid complex sentences in regulation, because somebody will end up paying the money for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. M. Damodaran, for your thought-provoking keynote address. I request Ms. Pinky Mehta and Sandeep Khosla, Director General, Bombay Chamber, to present a memento, a token of appreciation to Mr. M. Damodaran. Sir, I request you to come to on a dais, please. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Sandeep, sir. Now we move on to the first panel discussion on strengthening governance to Audit Committee. I would like to welcome our esteemed moderator and panelists for the session to the dais. I invite our moderator, Mr. Bharat Vasani. Mr. Vasani is a seasoned legal professional who is currently Senior Advisor Corporate Law at the Mumbai office of Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, has extensively advised on the complex issue of corporate and securities law. Prior to joining CAM, Mr. Vasani was the Chief Legal and Group General Counsel of a Tata Group. Mr. Vasani has over 40 years of experience at a senior management level and has successfully built and managed his in-house department for large multinationals. Mr. Vasani has extensively advised on a complex commercial transaction involving legal issues and various aspects such as related party transaction regime in India, new CSR regime, schemes of arrangement, M&A, joint ventures, etc., and has also extensively advised on an aspect of relating to inbound and outbound investment and security laws. I invite our panel members. I invite Mr. Uday Khanna. Mr. Khanna is the Chairman of the Audit Committee of a Kotak Mahindra Bank, Castrol India Limited and Pfizer Limited. Mr. Khanna was the Managing Director and CEO of Lafarge India from July 2005 to July 2011, and subsequently is a non-executive chairman till 2014. He was joined as Lafarge Group in Paris since June 1st, 2003 as a Senior Vice President of Group Strategy after a long stint 30 years of a Hindustan Unilever in variety of financial, commercial and general management roles, both nationally and internationally. Mr. Khanna is the recipient of Best Independent Director Award by Asian Center of Corporate Governance Sustainability in 2018. I invite Mr. Venkatadri. Mr. Venkatadri is the Chief Commercial Officer at Tata Chemicals. Prior to join, he has various leadership roles as a CEO of Nutrition Science Business and Chief Innovation and Digital Officer in Tata Chemicals. Before that, he was the Chief Operating Officer at Rallis India. In Unilever, he was a part of a corporate audit team for 3 years, where he was involved in audit over 25 companies in 25 odd countries. He has also been on an audit committee. He serves on a various committee of CII and Bombay Chamber. I invite Mr. Sharad Abhyankar. Mr. Sharad Abhankar is a partner in the Corporate and Commercial Practice Group in the Khaitan Company with over 30 years of experience. He has specialized in corporate laws, security laws, antitrust laws, telecom regulation, constitutional litigation, and international commercial arbitration. He advises Indian and international clients on the strategies, M&As, private equity investment and exits, capital market transaction, financial transaction, domestic and cross-border foreign collaboration, and joint ventures. Mr. Sharad Abhankar is a member of Advisory Committee and Drafting Committee of NEC Center of Excellence in Corporate Governance. He is an independent director on various listed and unlisted companies, Indian companies. Due to unavoidable reason, Mr. Anand Narayan could not join us today and he conveys his apology. Without taking further time, I request Mr. Bharat Vasani to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Very good morning to you and warm welcome on behalf of Bombay Chamber and my eminent panel members. I will just give you a very brief context-setting remarks. I would profusely like to thank Mr. Damodaran for setting a very right context. It's difficult to follow after Mr. Damodaran has spoken that you can make an impressive speech. I'll try to. Mr. Damodaran very rightly alluded to this accumulation of regulatory cholesterol in our system, and I tell you the highest accumulation is in securities law, where the SEBI is the regulator. I don't know how many of you are in the listed companies, but those of you who have read the latest SEBI amendment on market rumor, 3011, if you are suffering from sleep apnea or any other sleep disorder, read one paragraph of it and you will immediately fall asleep and only wake up next day morning. So the complications which can be brought into the regulations is a classic example is the Reg 3011 dealing with market rumors. Here the industry has also collaborated, so lawyers also have to take part of the blame. Number two, Mr. Damodaran alluded to simplicity in the regulations. Unfortunately, we all lawyers make our living out of complexities, and regulators are helping us with a drafting which has always multiple interpretations possible, and classic example is the related party transaction regime. Now, what I want to tell you is that our panel is going to discuss about the institution of Audit Committee and how you make it more effective, so to improve the corporate governance. The Audit Committee concept, Naresh Chandra Committee and Kumar Mangalam Birla Committee, Narayan Murthy Committee, and thereafter, of course, Uday Kotak Committee and LODR and all the stuff, has been in existence for 25 years. But surprisingly, despite the fact that accounts are properly weighted, scrutinized, and certified as true and fair view, the accounting frauds are getting reported in India with an alarming regularity. And it's worth discussing what is going wrong. It's a 25 years of existence. The other thing which is very surprising, Mr. Damodaran, which I find, that the judiciary, which is otherwise very activist, I did not come across, yesterday I was researching, I did not come across a single judgment directly of a higher judiciary on the liability of the audit committee members for certifying accounts which are misleading. They have taken all the directors together. Nowhere except SEBI in two of the recent orders have gone after the audit committee members, but by and large, the higher judiciary, that is the High Courts and Supreme Courts, have generally chosen to treat all the directors alike. Audit committee has not been granted any special favor. Now comes is the issue with regard to I wanted to discuss basically two, and then that will throw open the discussion. I have a very good panel. One of the issue which many audit committee members have told us that the entire process which is currently followed, which is that you have a quarterly results or annual results where the CFO makes or CEO makes a presentation if CEO has a finance background. Then you have an auditor coming and making a presentation, and then basically we are called upon to opine whether the accounts reflect true and fair view or the accounting standards have been complied with, and some of the most difficult director's responsibility statement under 134(5) we are required to certify. The entire process is so inadequate, and by and large some motherhood questions are asked at the audit committee meeting, why the inventory level has gone up, why this is, but immediately after the certification happens, Now in the West, from where we have imported this concept and transplanted into Indian regulatory system, there is a requirement under NYSE that the audit committee has to prepare a proper report and send it to the board of directors that we have examined these aspects, this is what we have found, and this is why we believe that accounts reflect the true and fair view except for these two items. Here we are not required to make any report. There is an alternate system here. CEO and CFO gives a certification that everything is fine. In a prescribed format, SEBI has prescribed format. SEBI now prescribes format for everybody because they don't trust company secretaries that they will do a proper job. So they prescribe format for every damn thing. In fact, the latest one on the market rumor, SEBI has also prescribed that if the stock exchange you have to write a letter, what would be the content of your letter is also prescribed. So this is what has happened. So now what has happened is that the time go on, and again, you have a uniform financial year. So most of the board meetings happen during that common 2-3 weeks period because of the statutory requirement of holding the accounts board meeting by a particular time. So most of these people are directors of multiple companies and audit committee members of multiple companies. Suddenly on their iPad, a huge chunk of data comes. And whether they have adequate time, and the business models have become very complex. Tata Steel, which was when I joined Tata Group, it was a small Jamshedpur focused steel company. Today it's a global company with multiple operations in multiple geographies. Like one example I'm giving, there are hundreds of such examples that the business models of most of the companies with hundreds of subsidiaries and affiliates and associate companies have become so complex. And these are essentially non-executive directors. We have to realize they are not a full-time directors. So they just have to go by a leap of faith. That is what, and some of the independent directors with whom I had the opportunity to discuss this issue very candidly spoke that they go by a leap of faith. That basically we rely on the certification by the CEO and CFO. We have no ability to go further than that. And of course, there's some good audit committee chairman. A lot of things depends on audit committee chairman, which we are going to take up in the discussion. We'll do some pre-audit work of meeting the CFO separately, the auditor separately, and do some more probing before they certify the accounts. The second question which comes to my mind and which I want to debate today, and I'm alerting all three of my panelists, I believe that the time has come now in India to have the concept of lead independent director, which is very much working efficiently in the West. Lead independent director is a person who is a man of eminence and integrity, stature, who would kind of, who is first among equals. He is not superior to other independent directors, but he has an office in the company. He has been provided with secretarial support. He has ability to call any of the officers of the company for further questioning when he requires. He comes to office regularly, not every day, but as and when he feels it is necessary for him to come and seek certain information, and then he debriefs other audit committee members. I don't know why we are afraid of it. I was told some of the CEOs don't like it. So when SEBI mooted this idea somewhere in 2000, I think 15 or 16, this idea was shot dead immediately because CEOs feel it is a dilution of their power, that somebody else with a parallel power center is getting created in the corporate headquarters. Be that as it may, we will discuss that topic. The larger question which is also bothering Mr. Damodaran, this is one area where many pundits are saying that the entire concept of independent director, which is, first we had, when the audit committee came, we had this requirement of 1/3 independent director. Then it became 50%. And one more corporate, every time a scandal happened, SEBI increased the number of requirements of independent directors. Then one more corporate scandal happened, it became 2/3. And I'm 100% sure, you can take it from me, one more big corporate accounting scandal and the requirement of independent director will be 3/4 of the audit committee members. Just now it is 2/3. But every time, but is it an answer? That you go on increasing, because there are people who believe that independent director is a concept itself is an oxymoron. Nobody can, independent director is appointed by promoter. His continuation after 5 years is dependence at the mercy of the promoter. His remuneration, though on paper decided by the NRC, is effectively decided by the promoter. So would he have the ability to really stand up on issues and ask inconvenient questions? So these are some of the issues. By increasing the strength of independent directors in the audit committee, and Western world, for example, NYC, all the audit committees are full of independent directors. There cannot be non-independent director on the audit committee. So these are some of the observations I wanted to make so that it can lead to a proper discussion and debate. Now I will start the panel discussion, and please feel free to ask us any question anytime or at the end, whichever way, but we are fine to answer any questions. We have very eminent people. Mr. Uday Khanna is the most experienced. You already read his profile that he's been on the boards and audit committee for many, many years and has been part of corporate India for 5 decades. Sarad has been a very dear friend and a partner of Khaitan Company for many years. And Sir Venkatadri was my former colleague at Tata's and is also vast experience and has been a member of the board in the audit committees. So let me start my round now. Mr. Khanna, I'll come to you first, and I would request you to make some opening remarks of what you believe about this topic and what are your views, what are the challenges of the audit committee, and what are your suggestions. 5 to 6 minutes.
Yeah, sure. I think your mic, sir. Am I audible? Yes. So I think firstly, having heard Mr. Damodaran, actually I feel there's very little further to add except to reflect on the issues that he made. But I will still try and give some perceptions of the role expected of the audit committee and some challenges which we can answer in the Q&A if you feel I have not covered them. So in my view, the audit committee's primary function is to assist the board of directors in fulfilling its corporate governance and oversight responsibilities. So that really sums up in its entirety that the board actually expects the audit committee to help it discharge its responsibilities. And the whole issue then is that how do we align all the actions to ensure transparency and integrity in whatever the company is doing and the board has established. So the aim, in my view, is to align the interests of all stakeholders. So in my view, while we are assisting the board of directors, the audit committee has a special role in aligning with all stakeholders, including, of course, the regulators, because they give you the license to operate. And in some ways, in a different way, I will echo what Mr. Damodaran is saying, that I can even see the audit committee as a partner with the regulator in ensuring good governance. Now that implies that there's a lot of debate and argumentation with the regulator in terms of the expectations, in terms of the rules and laws before they are formulated, to see that you can efficiently function. And the other point I want to make is that the audit committee works in close partnership with the statutory auditor, with the internal auditor, with the compliance function, and of course the operational management to ensure, in a broader term, good governance, but also I would say efficient management. One view I have of the audit committee is also that I see it as an in-house management consultant, continuously approving the operations of the company and ensuring what I will call organizational integrity and ethical conduct, as distinct from what we often understand that integrity and ethics is a personal issue. So how do you get a culture that you can institutionalize this? And in my view, the audit role plays a large part in ensuring that. The other point I want to make is the whole issue of purpose. In many companies, I find that there is no purpose defined. Now, how does the audit committee and the rest of the employees work if the purpose, what I would call the reason of being, is not clear? And again, the best example I have is Mr. Jamshedji Tata when he started the Tata Concerns, where he said the purpose of my companies is to serve the society around us. And once that purpose is there, I think there are many techniques in the audit committee, and I will digress, whether it's analytics and early warning signals an effective whistleblowing mechanism, and we can answer any questions. And on a whistleblowing, you need a continuous socialization that we reach the maturity level of what a whistleblower should be, rather than the form which many of us practice. In my experience, I've seen if you have an active whistleblower, you are analyzing all the concerns that are coming, you break it into categories, and get the relevant function, whether it is HR on culture and behavior, whether it's fraud control where the internal audit comes in. Do you do an RCA of all the frauds? And in my view, I would call, instead of saying audit of frauds, I call it a learning review. Because what is the learning from the instance that has happened? And then you block it so that it doesn't happen again. So again, some of the issues I'm doing on random, the issue of related party transactions is a huge issue. The law is very clear on the subject, where it casts on the independent directors a responsibility of approving or ensuring they're all right. Now, one of the suggestions which I can give, which saves the time of the audit committee, is I get the audit committee to appoint an auditor under the mandate of the audit committee to ensure that all the transactions are in terms of arm's length and the ordinary course of business, and that the right amount of transfer pricing is done. So this then facilitates the audit committee in approving these transactions, rather than one by one. If you discuss in the audit committee, I think the audit committee will last for a couple of months. The other advice for audit committees is that they must understand the business and work in close coordination. The whole issue of risk-based audit plans comes in. You have to work in closer consultation with the risk committee. And so I just want to end again with the power of what I would call corporate purpose. Because no company can achieve its full potential, in my view, unless they know what the corporate purpose is there. And I go back to what Mr. Damodaran said, of do what is right in every sphere. Lastly, I just wanted to end on the things that, in terms of, I take the cue from Mr. Damodaran, simplifying. In my view, corporate governance, as a friend of mine puts it, is based on your intention or niyat. If you have a good intention, you will get good corporate governance. If you don't have, no matter what you say on the boilerplate language, etc., it will not work. I think I'd like to end at this stage, and we'll be free to answer any questions you have. And
thank you, Mr. Khanna. I will certainly deal with some questions. Sarath, if your introductory comments on what you feel are the what is the major role for the audit committee, what are the key red flags they should be looking out for, and how they can make their functioning more effective.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Damodaran. Your, I think, initial remarks virtually crystallize everything that we wanted to discuss. And thank you, Udayji, for your suggestions and your very valuable inputs. So really, when we talk about governance, I want to forget that I'm a lawyer. Because lawyers sometimes get into lawyering or lawyered sort of responses to questions. I think we need to first forget that if we are talking about governance. Governance will start where compliance ends. Like Mr. Damodaran said, compliance is binary. It is either zero or all done or none. There is nothing like we will comply, we will do best endeavors to do the compliance, then you are clearly non-compliant. I don't think as a lawyer I will have any different answer to give to any client. But before we get into that step of governance, and therefore there cannot be a prescriptive governance. Prescription is rule. Prescription is compliance. Governance cannot be through rule making. And if it has to therefore come out of niti and niyat, then what is it that we need to do? So if you look at really the entire framework of governance that exists both under Companies Act as well as under LODR, really there are three core principles that I look at: trust, transparency, and accountability. Now, if they exist, what you also need to demonstrate that they exist. So it is like justice. It has to be seen being done. What we really find today, and the reason why governance is a few miles away from what it should have been, is that there is a significant trust deficit. And trust deficit is at different spheres. The first and foremost, trust deficit by the regulators against the enterprise. And that's unfortunate because I tend to believe that there are very few bad apples, but most of the industry wants to behave and have better things to do in life rather than doing mischief. Unfortunately, the bad apples have created so much of, I wouldn't call it bias, but it's more of a rigid approach to rule making, that we have nothing really better to do than to follow bad examples. I think that's a extreme disrespect to the intelligence and the intent of the industry, and I think we need to correct that at the fastest. The trust deficit is not only between regulators and the industry. Unfortunately, when we talk about the board processes, the trust deficit also exists in spheres which are internal to the organization. We want best of the people, we want a celebrity board, we want to review and do a diligence and ensure that we have best of the directors. But when it comes to their participation in meetings, do we really trust them that they have anything to contribute? So this lack of trust that directors can add value to managements, because what is the management perception generally? We are doing the day-to-day work, we know what exactly can be done and cannot be done. Don't give us gyan. You come only once in 3 months, so don't try to teach us what we should be doing. And that, I think, is one of the biggest gaps that we need to fill if we have to really look at governance and directors to really perform their role. Unfortunately, that the trust deficit also is sort of reciprocated when it comes to directors asking questions and seeking information. If you look at LODR, it uses the word, please comply with these regulations in letter and spirit. Why does the regulation need to really say that? Right? Chapter 2, which is sort of summary of principles of corporate governance, ends with saying that if there is any ambiguity or incongruence in interpretation of regulations, then the principles in this chapter will override. That is the weightage that our regulators have given to the corporate governance principles. So I want to talk about the related party transactions maybe a little later, but just to add to how internal audit questions, and I'm talking about typically the audit committee when it meets and you have an internal auditor making the presentation. I want to share a very interesting event that happened, and I was an eyewitness. So this was a company with multiple projects, so many projects that obviously the internal auditors had no bandwidth to do the internal audit for all the projects at all times, and therefore they would select 5 projects, 6 projects, 8 projects at a time, and they would present in a cyclical manner throughout the year. All the projects would be covered. So Q1 happened. There were some sort of systemic issues brought to the attention of audit committee. The management gave a very stereotype response that yes sir, we will fix this. We will fix this in next 3 months. Q2, internal auditors raised identical issues for the next set of 5 projects. The audit committee chair was a little uncomfortable, but he allowed it to let go with the same response in Q2 that we'll fix this. How much time? 3 months. When Q3 happened and the internal auditors raised exactly the same problems for the third set of projects. Now these projects were all identical, nothing, I mean they were just in diverse locations, there was nothing to really separate them by quality. He allowed the internal auditor to complete, the chair allowed the internal auditors to complete their presentation, asked the entire management to go away and invited MD and asked a simple question, and the MD was completely taken aback. He said, Mr. MD, why should we not recommend to NRC that you should be fired? Obviously the MD was completely taken aback. The audit chair, he did not understand why this question was being thrown at him at such so suddenly. So the audit chairperson said that I will tell you why we have this feeling. You have identical looking projects. They have nothing uncommon to them. When you knew in Q1 that there are systemic issues in projects, you promised that you will fix them in 3 months. Why did you wait for the second set of projects, third set of projects to be reviewed and the internal auditors to bring up exactly the same problems? You knew the problems on day one. If they were systemic, they should have been fixed, all of them in first 3 months, and not really we would have expected the same comments coming from internal auditors in Q3. Because what will happen is, if this continues, the regulators are going to point fingers at us that we knew the problems in Q1, we did nothing about it for the entire year and kept on believing a very stereotype sentence that yes, we will fix it. So this is something which, I mean, where the audit committee needs to enhance really the governance, this is exactly the vigil that they need to really enforce. I think we'll have many more topics to discuss, so I will stop there and maybe Mr. Venkatadri.
Yeah, Mr. Venkatadri, you are a man from the industry and you have also your different perspective on the audit committee and its role and how it can be made more efficient. If you can throw some light on it, then we will start the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks Bharat. I think a lot of key points have come up. Let me start, the point about what is important is, since we are talking about audit committee, the people are the, make an audit committee effective or non-effective. So it's important to have the right set of people. And let me talk about what my perspectives are. If we step back and look at it, typically the audit committee's remit is to make sure that there's an oversight on financial accounting, in audit, risk management. So typically what has happened is there that most audit committees used to be filled with people with a financial background, chartered accountants, etc. That has been the traditional aspect that we've always had for quite some time. What is actually happening is there that with businesses becoming far more complex and the kind of issues that are coming up, I think what is also relevant is to make sure that along with people with a financial background, I think understanding finance is a prerequisite. I mean, that's the minimum requirement that is there. But along with that, how do you make sure that you have audit committee members, first of all, who understand the domain very well? Because different businesses have different levers and different ways of, things that could potentially go wrong. So it's important for a person to have an understanding of the domain. The second kind of, diversity that would be useful to have in a audit committee is also people with different functions. For example, we've had, I think, Bharat, you've been in many audit committees. Having a person with a legal background is very useful because today there are a lot of issues that are coming up, either from a statutory issues that are coming up or interpretation of law. And having a legal person on the audit committee actually helps quite a lot in anticipating some of the issues. Another important area that we do realize and we recognize that as we go along is this whole thing about today companies are becoming highly technology oriented, whether it's a manufacturing company, financial services have always been far more technologically advanced, but even manufacturing organizations, service organizations. So it's very important to have set of people who understand technology, how things operate. And today with the whole issue of cyber security becoming very, very touchy, things like GDPR, data privacy, etc. So, people who understand how does technology work, how does security and data work is also very, very useful to have in the in the committee. Now, one of the things that we have always been, it's been there for quite some time is the gender diversity, and that's something which is definitely a welcome thing, because definitely, women bring about different ways of looking at the same problem, so that's helpful. But one of the things that I know I may be saying something which may look a little, out of place, is there, how do we get age diversity? Because most often than not, what tends to happen is that most of the audit committee members are people who are, 45, 50, even more than that. Today, with the kind of changes that are taking place in the environment and the technological developments, how about having a person who is a 30-year-old in the audit committee who comes with a very different perspective and probably may be able to ask different type of questions. So, what is important is to have a right combination of audit committee members. Along with that, this is from a technical perspective. The other important part of it is that we must, like it was also mentioned, by Bharat, saying that how independent are independent auditors. So obviously, most independent auditors are also dependent upon the board, the management or the promoters to bring them on board. So how do we make sure that we have a set of people who have diverse way of thinking? This whole issue about, many of us have seen that, we all know that this whole concept of what we call as groupthink, one person articulates it and everybody tends to follow it. So so one is the harder part of it, which is the functional part. The second part of it is the softer part of it. Point number one, people who don't fall into groupthink, one person says, others follow. People who are willing to speak their mind, even if it's not very conducive for the management to hear. I think these are some of the things which also would be very useful to have in an audit committee, and hence the diversity of function, diversity of thought are very crucial parts to make an audit committee very effective.
Thank you, Mr. Venkatadri. Now, we will do some question answers and then we'll take some questions on the floor also. So, Mr. Khanna, I wanted to ask you a little delicate question which has been we discussed in whispers in corporate corridors and regulatory corridors. It was brought about by SEBI. I don't recollect the exact year, sometime in the concept paper, and thereafter it was shot down. This concept of lead independent director. The issue is that, every time there are 4, 5, 6 independent directors and one director feels, every time, why should I only bail the cat and why should I only raise the issue? Others are all keeping quiet and eating cashew nuts. So why I become unpopular, then my 5-year term gets over, I may not be renewed. The managing director is watching all the independent directors with a very intimidating body language. So in this scenario, do you think a very senior, experienced person can be a lead independent director who can galvanize, who has a time to spend on devote the time for the company and look into the issues much more deeply, would be a useful addition and would improve the quality of deliberations at the audit committee meeting. It would improve the quality of deliberations at the board meeting. It's also because he has an office in the company which is provided secretarial support, he has access to the top management team, and he can perhaps do a much more executive kind of a role than just coming as a non-executive director. So your views on that. And he's compensated also differently.
See, I think you have some, this depends, in my view, on the composition of the board. Where the company has a non-executive chairman, in my view, he is the lead independent director and he should discharge all the roles that you have described and should be facilitated. Where the chairman and managing director is executive, then I would fully agree there must be a lead independent director who then discharges the role. So I think what I would say, either the chairman, non-executive chairman discharges it. If you don't have, then you need a lead director to do it.
Slight variation, sir. If there's a promoter, non-executive chairman, then?
I think, it's a matter, I would still say then you should have a lead independent director. And I'll give you the example of Infosys, which has one.
Yes.
So you have to find a way to do, but you should not have a non-executive chairman and a lead independent director, because then the roles clash. So in my view, there it's the non-executive chairman who should discharge the role of the independent director, guiding the directors, facilitating, and indeed he is the person who should chair the ID's meeting, in which case.
Yes.
Either a lead independent director or a non-executive.
Correct. Absolutely. Sir, I want to ask you, this entire regime which you briefly referred to, related party transaction, which is one of the responsibility of the Audit Committee under Section 177 and Regulation 18 of LODR. Now, problem what has happened, the entire regime, in particularly for listed companies, has become extremely technical, rule-based, and in some cases you may say impractical, like purpose and effect test. Directly or indirectly benefiting subsidiary or also, the way the entire language which has come since 1st April 22 and 1st April 23, many audit committee members are wondering how do we ensure and satisfy ourselves that all the transactions are done in the ordinary course and arm's length and with so much of complications. And so what is your advice and recommendation to the audit committee, how they should look out for the red flags and which way they handle this entire responsibility which is cast on them by the regulators? And let me tell you, SEBI has a very huge regulatory expectations from the independent directors and audit committee, and that is reflected in some of the recent orders passed, particularly a couple of cases like Linde case and a couple of other cases which have been recently decided.
So related party transaction is, thank you, that's a very pet topic for me to speak. The global literature has clearly shown that related party transactions are neither bad nor good. It ultimately depends on the niti and niyat. And therefore, there is no reason, and therefore SEBI has not prohibited RPTs. Clearly the working group also very explicitly said that there is no reason to prohibit RPTs. They need to be regulated, they need to be probably approved in a certain manner, which will give assurance that they are not abusive or they are not being used by controlling stakeholders at the expense of minority shareholders. I think that's really the broad principle for considering RPTs. So over a period of time, and now that we have lived a good 10 years of Companies Act, I think that sea change that happened with the 2013. Prior to 2013, we neither had the definition of related party in company law, nor did we have the approval process. So what we had is really the accounting standard, which means you do a post facto intimation or disclosure of related parties, transactions with related parties, and disclosure of who are related party relationships. That was under AS 18. Then we had the Companies Act, which defined related party for the first time. We had to then go through a 3-stage or a hierarchical way of approving RPTs. So all RPTs, we know that they have to go through audit committee. Selected RPTs under 188 will need a board approval. And then if there are significantly large transactions, that will need shareholders approval. Just a finer aspect of the distinction between Companies Act definition of what is material and under LODR, one talks about a standalone turnover, the other talks about consolidated. So I think that sometimes we have seen that distinction in the drafting is missed by some companies when they are looking at materiality or looking at significant transactions that may require shareholders' approval. Companies Act, of course, for the first time created that distinction that who can vote. If you are a contracting counterparty and a related party, then you should be prevented from voting. LODR, of course, has taken it to a different level to say no related party can vote, whether you are concerned with the transaction or not concerned with the transaction. So, while SEBI aligned itself with Ind AS 24 definition, let us look at the complexity of ordinary course of business and at arm's length. So one of the things that most of the audit committees are glad to look at is some kind of a third-party independent assessment, and I guess the transfer pricing reports are doing reasonably well. Now what it obviously means is that the audit committee members are doing their homework. I think everything is postulated on that you are reading the report right from the purpose for which it was obtained. Valuation reports are given, are placed before the board, but how many of us really want to read what was the purpose for which even the management asked for that report? Was it for the purpose of identification of or approval of RPTs, or it was something else? So I think spending a lot of time on the agenda is very crucial.
Sir, just was one supplementary question. Should not audit committee prioritize? Because see, if there are balance sheet items, some malignant real estate transaction with a promoter company, vis-a-vis the routine items where, for example, there are, generally there are transactions with subsidiaries which are in ordinary course, routine purchase of items and products and supply of services. So should they not prioritize and look at issues which, you can focus on and focus more on balance sheet items, less on P&L items?
Sure. So what some of the audit committee chairs, and really this is for the audit committee chairperson to prioritize and say that please split the agenda between the routine items which we can just run through, because we know what these issues are, what these items are, and what are the sort of pricing models. But where there is larger deliberation required, clearly split those items. Even for the board meetings, I think many companies have done that board meetings today run over 2 days. So on one day you do more sort of thought-provoking or deliberative items, and on the other day you can do most of the routine items which can be numerous by number. But just on the the widening of the definition of both related party and related party transaction, that has certainly complicated. We have lived through that for now 3 years almost. Regulators are obviously not changing their thought process or diluting that as of now. So I think in terms of approval of the related party transactions, there is a huge apprehension as to whether we will be able to get the shareholders' approval. And where does this apprehension really come from? The apprehension today comes from a very different intermediary, that is proxy advisors. They are invisible influencers of huge voting power in the market, with unfortunately no financial outcome of the voting that will happen based on their recommendations. So I think they have a much larger fiduciary role today in the market because they are able to influence the voting power, particularly on related party transaction approvals. Because what has happened is, if you actually ask me, most of the listed companies, they have actually started doing this. To the proxy advisors, they do say that वही बात करेंगे जो आपको पसंद हो, जो तुमको हो पसंद वही बात करेंगे. Now,
that is a theme song for the audit committee. Is that
really governance that even the proxy advisors expect? And that is my really a question to be thrown to a fiduciary, that just because you have a set of codes which you have prescribed for approving or recommending or not recommending transactions, that maybe a gold, platinum, whatever, utopian standard, is that a realistic standard in the first place? I think, so they have a lot to really discharge that. We will probably see the companies dealing with that issue as the period goes. One of the very different aspects I wanted to talk about on related party is nothing to do with LODR or Companies Act. There are different laws which have defined related party, and I am specifically talking about IBC. Right? There is a very expanded definition of what is a related party, and it includes a technology partner or who is somebody who is giving you substantial support as an enterprise. That association of that entity makes that third party a related party for the purpose of IBC. Now, why is that crucial? Number one, we have a super definition of what is a relative. There was a time in the 56 Act when we had almost 50 plus relatives. By 1975, हमने आधों को बेदखल कर दिया. You are not my relative. Why? Because Schedule 1 has been amended now. So it is such a sort of opposite direction that we are talking about, that on one hand there was a huge debate as related party transactions was a taboo. And what did we do with the relative definition itself? We reduced it significantly as compared to Companies Act 56. It has come down from 23 to 8. Now look at IBC definition. For the first time, we have now recognized the importance of Shakuni mamas, chachas, batijas, fufas in the family, and they are treated as related parties. Now, in a normal audit committee, this definition and this scrutiny will never come to the table. Now, audit committee is the first one to really smell the financial status of the company. Are we nearing the twilight zone? Are we nearing a financial stress? Should we be looking at a different definition of related party so that these IBC related transactions remain in the visibility, not in the approval, but in the visibility? Because I will tell you what is the biggest danger. The biggest danger is that under IBC, once the IBC Act has fallen on the company, the RP, the resolution professional, has the ability to terminate all these related party transactions. Now you can imagine that these are the people who have supported you in the worst of the times, and they are going to suffer because IBC law says something different. If you are also a financial creditor, you are prevented from voting in the CIC meetings. So, if you are talking about really enhancing governance, then we should be not looking at only companies which are pink in health, but also companies which may be facing stress. And this is something which, if the audit committee is not going to be aware of, then who is going to talk about it? So that was, a different angle than the usual Companies Act and LODR.
Thank you, Sarathya. Venkatadri, since he referred to Shakuni Mama, I want to refer to the larger Mahabharata theme. I have seen many board meetings where there's a very powerful promoter CEO who is present with a very, eminent personality. When suddenly you find that the chairman of the audit committee somewhat becomes like Dhritarashtra, not willfully shutting the eyes. Then CFO is like a Sahadev, he knows everything, kya gadbad hai, gotala hai, accounts mein, but chup rehna better hai. And everybody, and there is an international practice now, strongly recommended by all corporate governance organizations, that CEO and managing director should not be present in the audit committee. He is not a member. But in India, I find most companies, CEO is a permanent invitee to the audit committee meetings, and is intimidating body language against CFO. That fellow is so afraid of speaking up anything. And I am first-hand experience where I confronted a CFO on one particular provision which was shown as contingent liability, which was actually requiring provisioning. But because it would have led to dilution of profits and lesser bonus to the CEO, the CFO is forced to accept that accounting treatment. I'm telling you of a listed company. So do you think CEO should be present at the meeting? Because there is an international recommendation, CEO should not be present at the audit committee meeting unless invited for specific questions.
See, I'll answer it in this manner that, there is no 0 and 1 answer. Let me start it this way. It's not like a black or a white, is to say that if the CEO is present, he or she will dominate.
No, all CEOs are not Duryodhan. I must admit it.
Yeah. And the important part of it is if, for example, if the audit committee is empowered enough and they are strong enough, then it does not matter if the CEO is present or not present. I would say that it is important for the CEO to be present, may not be the person who does all the answering. Because finally, whatever gets discussed in the audit committee, any issues that come up, the ownership actually finally is on the CEO of the company. So the person who is going to take ownership, if he or she is not going to be present in the meeting, is unfair.
But Venkatath, just pause here for a moment. I have seen situations where CEO is present and you are witness to one board I was referring to, where the CFO is not allowed to open his mouth. Every time a question is posed to CFO, CEO answers.
So that is the reason why it is for the audit committee chairperson to come in between and then say that this is a question for, it could be for the CEO, it could be for the CFO, or it could be for one of the operating managers who is sitting in the audit committee and who is responsible for that function. I think it's a better way to do it in this manner. Now, let me also take it, I will take it into another angle. I will add one other point in terms of how do you make sure that the CEO or the CFO are really independent and they don't do things which are not good for the company. I do remember that, in the case of in Unilever, there used to be this thing saying that one of the ways in which people could step outside the boundary is in fixing up their performance. Now, okay, there is an NRC which actually reviews and decides what is the compensation for the top management. But I remember that in Unilever, the corporate audit, which I was also part of, which was not part of the company, there were statutory auditors, there were internal auditors, but corporate auditors went directly reporting right up to the Unilever team. One of the things that as corporate auditors, our job was to look at the goal sheets and the performance of the CEO and the top management to make sure that the REM committee obviously does not get into that level of detail to say that, they don't have the time and energy to look at all the details, that people are not crossing the line. So there could be, I'm using that as an example to say that you could still have a control that the CEO or the CFO is not roughshoding over it, but finally it all comes to the audit committee chairperson and the audit committee, the independent directors putting their foot down. I think that's the right way to do it.
Mr. Khanna want to say something on this issue.
The first thing that I want to say is this trend that the audit committee should be discussing only with independent directors and the CEO is not there. As a generality, I am totally against, because in the audit committee, other than related party issues, a lot of other improvement issues come up. So who is responsible for executing if he's not there? Because otherwise then what it will mean is, as an audit committee chair, I have to then have another meeting with the CEO to tell him what happened. So as a general rule, I am of the view that the CEO should be in the audit committee. When related party and conflict of interest arises, he should recuse. And that is again the audit committee chairman's thing, that look, on this issue you will not come. Lastly, the issue of the CFO staying silent or the compliance officer staying silent, I think that we have to come to softer behaviors. And if I feel that the CFO or the compliance officer are not independent and not professional, I will resign from that board rather than continue. So that is it's a behavior thing, the softer issues. I spoke about culture, I spoke about vision. So those have to come in, which the chair of the audit committee should come
So
in.
Khanna sir, but what I've seen is the CFO wants to talk, but this guy doesn't allow
But
him.
that's where the audit committee chair has to, you can even have meetings. I have a meeting as audit committee chair with the CFO, with the compliance officer, with the internal audit outside the thing. So, this is where, not as lead director, but even as audit committee chair, you have a role which goes higher than just conducting the committee. And that you do whether informal consultations, keeping in touch. As audit committee chair, I would even mentor the CFO and establish a question where, and I don't mind saying this, where once you establish trust, I know that the CFO cannot answer some questions, but in my informal meeting, I pick up the cue, and as audit committee chair, I ask the question because the intention is to improve the performance of the company. There is no hidden agenda, and that's where the niyat comes in. So
Yeah.
I think one of the things which you are doing is the role of the audit committee chair goes beyond just conducting the audit.
Correct,
They have to
absolutely.
you have meeting with statutory auditors. I have even recommended you should meet the regulators, what their expectations are. So, and this is a continuous improvement process. But to say, and I know one regulator says that is objecting to the CEO sitting in the audit committee. And I have said, look, as an audit head, I will not have this. I must have it because otherwise who does the rectification?
Yeah, there are differing views on this because there are, anyway, but the issue which is there is that I think audit committee chair plays a very critical role in terms of dealing with the softer issues also and allowing everybody to speak up, ask the right questions, and particularly when the company is not doing well, there is a tendency to show certain major liability as contingent liability rather than actual liability and provide for it.
Statutory auditor also then comes in.
But statutory auditor, now I am very happy that NFRA has come in with a bang, absolutely, and NFRA is so unpardoning when it comes to dealing with this issue that independent auditors have now developed the spine and they are standing up on issues. I am telling you, they are resigning, they are not willing to sign up the accounts. We have seen Deloitte resign from this famous Byju's, and many other auditors have resigned. They are standing up, and NFRA is in fact now extending its net much wider. The other day I read NFRA chairman's statement that, well, if there's a major accounting fraud or regulatory failure, it's unfair to just stop at auditors. We will question the role of the audit committee too. Now, we have 10 minutes left, and may I request the audience, if you can ask the questions, we'll try to answer, though we don't guarantee that we'll be able to answer all the questions. So yes, please, the gentleman here who is, can you please take the mic to the gentleman here in the third row?
Thank you so much. This is Sandeep Goswami, SGA. We are an international company on climate science and policy. My questions are very simple. I heard this is very interesting. 3 parts. First, I will bring in the cyclone Michang. And
Sorry, can you?
I will bring in cyclone Michang, which happened, if you know, Chennai Petrochemicals Limited, which got oil spill. I want to know what happened in the governance area that such a big company, Pink of Health, and they had such a major environmental disaster happening, not understanding that climate change can come in when there is a BRSR, there is a TCFD, and all financial regulations here. What happened there? What happened to the governance there? Thank you.
Could you understand? I couldn't. I'm sorry, but
You're not clear. Sorry,
the question was not very audible here.
What issue are you talking about?
I'm talking about, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is it better? Yeah. Thank you. Point was that there was, as you know, climate change has become a major issue. BRSR is already there. SEBI has created it.
Yes.
It is part of the governance. Law is there, but we saw this oil spill, a major oil spill, the disaster that happened with Cyclone Michang coming in. We all know Bay of Bengal is a major area for cyclones. What happened to the governance and what happened to the assurance there when this company, being Pink of Health, could not actually take care of such things?
I think what you're talking about is the risk committee and evaluating the risk.
Yes.
And in my view, the audit committee and risk committee have to work in very close tandem. We have not consider ESG is very important, and I think nobody in this audience will take it lightly. But so these risks have to be evaluated, and in the risk committee you have to see these and then have mitigating factors, and then you evaluate on a continuous basis the risk, what is their probability, and then you do what is the mitigation action, and then there's a residual risk. So today we have not discussed the role of the risk committee.
Exactly.
In my view, and that is an equally important, and given the uncertainties in this world, the risks are much more. Your ship could get sunk, there could be
So to answer your question straight, if the audit committee or the risk committee has not foreseen this problem, then there is some kind of a failure on that part, I would say.
Thank you so much.
Any other, yeah, there is a question here, please.
Good morning.
Can you please tell your name also?
Yeah, my name is Stephen. Just to put in perspective, the keynote speaker mentioned about simple rules and regulations. We are all familiar with the 10 commandments, which are very simple. It just says, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, etc. There is a list of 10. But the 11th commandment is very important, thou shalt not get caught. So we are very, our country is very good. You saw all these frauds that took place, ILFS, etc. So the integrity is not more at with the independent directors who are neither independent, they're totally dependent on your daily bread from these promoters, directors. My question is, how can an independent director who's in 20 companies at its max, attending 4 board meetings a year, which is 80 days and 2 days travel time, 160 days, 360 days is attending board meeting, how can he really contribute to the company's, resources? You know what I mean? Where is the time he gets to evaluate even a company per se? Thank you.
I think what you've raised is a question of what is the diligence that an independent director does in the board meetings, outside the board meetings, and does he understand the business and does he question management? Now, and here we are going to the role of an independent director. It has nothing to do with audit committee members. The best definition I heard of an independent director, I think it's Ramcharan, who compares an independent director to a sparring partner. In boxing, if you see, the sparring partner keeps landing punches on the champion to make him better and become the world champion. So if this is a role which independent directors have of asking the uncomfortable questions, seeking answers, and in the process improving the governance and the performance of the company. But I agree with you in complex organizations, and again, I think the issue of 4 meetings, in my view, there should be much more. In companies, audit meetings, sometimes you end up having 8 audit committee meetings. They have to be event-based, issue-based, and sufficient time has to be taken. And the independent director's role is really to ask the uncomfortable questions, keep landing the punches and get answers. And in the process, hopefully, he will unearth if something wrong is going on. But I can tell you, if the management wants to hide things from the independent director, and that's why I raised the softer issues of code of business conduct, what is the purpose of the organization, they come in and ensure that in due course we will have corporate governance improving. But there will be always bad issues, and that's where I think Mr. Damodaran made the point. Such people should then be hung, rather than changing the law and making the honest people suffer. So that's, I think, I don't know if it answers
I agree. Basically, this issue is always a debate, that as I told you, Professor Nirmalya Kumar from Singapore University has written that in India, the concept of independent director is oxymoron. Because so when you are selected, you meet the chairman of the board or the NRC, you need to convey the impression that you are very pliable and will toe the line. Eventually, you may ask inconvenient questions at the audit committee meeting, but nobody likes a person. But you can still ask inconvenient questions without becoming offensive. without being dislikable. Don't create, it's a boardroom and not a battle room. So you can definitely ask inconvenient questions in a nice way. You can be, but people give up very easily. You should not give up. The situation where I was telling you, a lot of data was supplied to me to say that it was a contingent liability, but I persisted and eventually the board agreed that we had to provide for it. So I think there are ways and ways of skinning the cat, and not necessary that you become very confrontationist from board meeting number 1. You can slowly build up your gravitas and then start asking inconvenient questions. But when you are selected, at least convey the impression that you are very pliable, otherwise you may not get selected.
Just one question from me. First of all, excellent panel discussion. Thanks for all the experience sharing, if I can say so. When this new RPT transaction, the SEBI LODR came few years back, one of the provision, I wanted to get the experience of the expert panel here, was a transaction by the company or the subsidiary with a non-related party benefiting a related party. I don't know how under the world the audit committee or the board can identify those transactions, but I just want to seek some experience sharing how we identify these transactions, or, that's the question to the expert panel.
I mean, it's a very difficult question, but one of the issues that has to be done is that in large companies with a lot of subsidiaries, in some organizations, we've actually formed a committee on oversight over subsidiaries. Yeah. A special board committee, yeah, whose only role is to examine and then bring to light. Now, the audit committee, where the subsidiaries are consolidated, the audit committee, because the figures come there and you can highlight through the financial controller and not. But you could have minority subsidiaries which are not even consolidated. That is a real issue, and I think the only answer is to create another oversight body in companies that have a lot of subsidiaries, which deals with that. So in the ILFS issue, the issue was that nobody was looking at the subsidiaries. There was no oversight committee, and some of them were JVs, so they were not even consolidated. This, I think, will evolve, and actually I would count on professionals like you to tell us how to improve that. But that needs to be tackled, and it's linked to the related party issue also there.
It's a very tough question. There are millions of transactions. And when you have a counterparty which is a related party, you have a universe to examine. But when there's no universe to examine, it's an open-ended question. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Yes?
So when you really look at the provision on purpose and effect, I guess the directors need to be a little more vigilant. The rule got in the LODR due to a mischief, and I think we all know that the only mischievous transactions can bring such regulation, and therefore if you can smell the mischief, get deeper into it, understand whether there is something more that is apparently not on the agenda, and therefore it's entirely up to the audit committee to really investigate who the real beneficiary is, and it's not that difficult to really get the answers.
See, this message shows your time is up for quite some time. So may I request that if you can, we can park your questions. With the coffee break, we are all available and we will answer those questions, because we are really running short of time, and there is a second panel which is eagerly waiting to discuss their issues, and it will be unfair for us to encroach upon their time.
The last question, sir. You can reduce that coffee time, sir. You can reduce the coffee time.
Yeah, so I'll answer your question having a nice cup of coffee with you.
Okay. Sir, I would just ask you a small question to all the panelists, sir. What measures would you suggest or recommend to detect the fraud and misappropriations in time? Because many times it has happened, matters have gone to audit committee and various other board members also, but then the steps are taken after the stable is closed when the house is stolen. So what preventive measures would you suggest to detect the fraud and to prevent the fraud?
Fraud is a very detailed subject. If we start debating, we'll be here till the cows come home. I will separately discuss with you on the audit committee,
But
because it's a very detailed
all
subject.
I can add is that maximum frauds today are detected through analytics.
Yes.
So what companies have to do, and the audit committee has to see that there are huge technologies, there are huge programs, and the audit committee has to ensure that exception reporting and early warning signals arise out of analytics, and you can then go on to AI and machine learning.
Throw up the red flags, so don't
that
worry.
we can, but I had mentioned that the RCA of fraud should be done in a manner that recurrence cannot take place, unlike the example that you gave, every 3 months the same thing was happening. That is then dependent on the audit committee. Secondly, monitoring of the open points of audit committees. If they are not done well, there's no point in doing an audit if the recommendation accepted is not implemented. So there you need a very sharp, the audit committee. In actual fact, after the approval of the minutes, the second agenda is action taken report on the previous. And you have to hold that very seriously. So we are getting into some of the discipline of an audit committee, but one should make sure that no loopholes take place. I have seen many companies, there is no action taken report. And you, as an independent member, you can even lose sight what happened with the observation that happened. So these are systems and processes which have to be tightened and come to the notice, and then you take action.
Yeah, just to conclude, one
running short of,
observation.
we are running over time.
Sorry, just half a minute. So if, all of us are going to be on the boards, be on audit committees, be responsible or be held accountable for what we did as directors. So what are the 3 crucial documents really in life of a company that will prove that you even functioned as a director? Okay, there are only 3. The agenda, so you have to be, of course, very conscious and very cognizant of what is your memorandum, what is the articles. That's a basis. But I think the depth of agenda, the depth of discussions that happen at the meeting, which means the minutes have to be very, very elaborate. I am personally not against naming the directors when it comes to noting, bringing out the observations. And the third one is policies, because policies are documents which can make an institutional decision making much simpler, consistent, more scientific, more objective. I think that can really demonstrate that you have been dealing with issues, you are dealing with reviewing policies, you are updating policies. All of that, I think, can clearly demonstrate that how you functioned as a director.
Thank you very much. Sorry, we little overshot the time.
Thank you, all the panelists and moderator. I will request Mr. Sandeep Khosla to come on dais to give a memento to our panelist and the moderator as a token of appreciation. To Mr. Venkatadri. To Mr. Sharad Abhankar. To Mr. Uday Khanna. And our moderator, Mr. Bharat Vasani. I request all the panelists and moderator to stay back for the group photograph.